Heaven for the pastoral words and prayers that we need so badly. And what better way to move forward than looking at Jesus? So as a kid, I loved the time I had with my cousins, friends in the neighborhood, and others I got to know because I got into the Boy Scouts up there on the north side of Chicago. So we did all kinds of stuff. Pretty much it was, if we said we're doing it, we're not quitting. That's a ways back. It's a good thing you can't smell that photo, because this is a bunch of guys, 11 to 18, who for 2 weeks were at a camp in Michigan, western Michigan, no running water and no electricity. We got one wash-up bath in the 2 weeks we were there in the middle weekend. We could only use Ivory soap because it was biodegradable, so just be glad you can't smell what you see. And that's a winter trip we took. That was a blast. We learned to skate out there, and we just had a bunch of fun, though. Would you trust those guys to do anything? And the next photo is, that's how we would eat. Those are called dining flies or tarp tents. And we would get out there, and it didn't matter if it was raining or not, that's what we had. We cooked our own food over an open fire. But we had some fun challenges. And there was this season where there were these two guys drove us nuts. They were young. I was probably 16 or 17, one of the leaders, like, as it were. And man, over meals, they would reach across guys to grab food like they'd never eaten before. They would cuss up a storm, and then they'd start screaming at each other. I mean, like they just couldn't stand each other. And then 10 minutes later, they were arm in arm like they're best friends. Drove us nuts. Like, what on earth are these guys here for? Thankfully, the scoutmaster who loved Jesus and really modeled it well, in fact, so much so, some of my friends came to Christ through his leadership. He would remind us that that scout troop was for guys like those two guys. And in fact, he went and visited the home of one of those two, and when he came back and reported the living conditions and what that family was doing to try to make ends meet, it changed everything for those of us who were leaders. We were far more patient, far more loving, because we understood and because he reminded us of who we should be and who they were. Stories like that are always important to us because we have the tendency to look at someone in a judgmental way, often without even knowing their story. Which brings us to another question that Jesus asks, giving someone a chance to move out of one way of living toward another way, which is much closer to his heart. And this all began because I picked up this book, Jesus Asked, which is an incredible way of looking at the questions he asked. Came out of that book, picked up the Harmony of the Gospels, read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which is what this is, in chronological order, underlining all the questions. And it just opened up whole new insights. I've got copies down there if you want to see it. If you think, man, maybe I should buy it, maybe not. It's fascinating. Well, this moment in Jesus' life comes in a totally different setting. So if you have a Bible with you or you have to have the app, turn to Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7, we'll start in verse 36. Or you could follow along because we'll put the stuff on screen as well to make it simple. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to have dinner with him. So Jesus went to his home and sat down to eat. Now, Pharisees were the religious leaders of the day. In fact, the word itself describes somebody who is separated for a life of purity. Sadly, most of the Pharisees we read about in the New Testament were pretty much religious rule keepers and enforcers. And they had a tremendous amount of power and influence in their communities. Let's go further. Verse 37. When a certain immoral woman from the city heard he was eating there, she brought a beautiful alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. Then she knelt behind him at his feet, weeping. Her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them off with her hair, and then she kept kissing his feet and putting perfume on them. So it's dinner time at the home of a very prominent religious leader, a Pharisee named Simon. The meal was probably served on a patio or a space that others might be able to even approach. It wasn't necessarily inside an enclosed area. And I love how various artists over the centuries have tried to depict this moment. It's hard to see on the screen, but I love the almost the chaos, which would be a typical Middle Eastern meal. A lot of people, and Jesus is sitting there, and the woman comes at his feet. This was painted in 1737. This next image is from an artist that painted this one in 1570. Each of them, I think, portraying a scene of a typical gregarious Middle Eastern meal taking place with a lot of people there, and somehow this woman sneaks into that space. Now remember, crowds at this point are following Jesus everywhere, so it's not unusual to see him hounded even at a meal in a home. But at this home, Simon invites all of his influential friends. And oftentimes, like I say, a meal like this would be served maybe out on a larger patio. The rendering of a woman by one artist at the feet of Jesus, I love this one. This is priceless because I believe it captures the emotions of that moment for her. How would you paint it, by the way? So we can imagine at this meal, people are laughing and talking and arguing, which is exactly what I grew up with in my Middle Eastern family. Christmas dinner always featured incredible food, Aunt Panna being an hour late, arguments between my dad and his siblings especially about politics, religion, or Chicago sports, which was kind of like religion. Now I'm telling you, you have to see it to believe it. I mean, they're yelling at each other over Christmas dinner. You know, they should have traded this one. If only the mayor would do this one. And they would go on and on. But when it was over, it'd be all over. They'd hug and kiss. Merry Christmas. Good to see you. It's like a bad movie. But that's what I grew up with. In fact, you could ask my wife what it was like the first time she experienced it, unlike anything she'd ever seen. Well, that's kind of like the lively dinner I envision happening at Simon's house, along with the kind of people that Simon would invite. People like him, prominent, important, influential, clean, and proper. Somehow, in the midst of that dinner party, a woman makes her way to Jesus. The woman is described as having lived an immoral life. And so the obvious tones of that statement give us an idea of what that might have been like. But I also find it interesting that the writer was not more specific. And I wonder if that's because it leaves it open for the opportunity for us to put in our own selves with what the moment may be for us and where we would have been at in that point of life. It's intentionally vague, I think, maybe. But so here she is. She's one of those kinds of people. And we read on in verse 39. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. She is a sinner. Imagine him thinking more. Doesn't he know what kind of person she is? How on earth can he let her even touch him? I'm so much better than her. Why is he even wasting time and giving her attention? She wasn't invited. I'm the host of this party. He has no clue who she really is. Well, Jesus knows what kind of person she is, and he also knows what kind of person Simon is. That's the problem. The problem is not that Jesus is clueless. The problem is that Simon is. We go further on. Then Jesus answered his thoughts. Simon, he said to the Pharisee, I have something to say to you. Well, go ahead, teacher. Now, I wonder how Simon said this. Was it maybe with a patronizing smirk or some sort of posing like Hollywood arrogant, like, yeah, whatever, or just really simply a simple response? But I also wonder if he had any idea what was coming. Then Jesus told him this story. A man loaned money to two people, 500 pieces of silver to one and 50 pieces of silver to another. Now, in the original language, the denomination of money that was used was called a denarii. And one denarii was worth about a day's wage. So if we go shoot at like $10 an hour for us today, that'd be $80 would be a day's wage. No small thing. And when Jesus tells the story, And so 50 denarii would be $4,000. 500 would be 40,000. The exact amount doesn't matter. But if you're struggling for 1 day's wage, but you have 40 days' wage weighing on you, you have 40,000 weighing on you, you're only making 80 a day, it's overwhelming. And that's the point of the story Jesus is making. And so Jesus goes on. But neither of them could repay him. So he kindly forgave them both, canceling their debts. Who do you suppose loved him more after that? Now, I wonder if Simon just blurted out the answer. I wonder if because it was so obvious, it'd be like, well, duh, the one who owed the most money. But then again, I wonder if Simon paused for a moment. If he'd been around Jesus at all, answering one of his questions might have been risky business. I mean, it seems like it's supposed to be a squirrel, but... So Simon answered, and I imagine him this way: I suppose the one for whom he canceled the larger debt. Not a lot of confidence there, and for good reason. Well, there's that hesitation, I suppose. It seems like something's starting to go and brew through Simon's mind. Uh-oh, what's Jesus getting to? There's something beyond what I think is a simple answer. That's right, Jesus said. And then Jesus turned to the woman and said to Simon, look at this woman kneeling here. He turns to the woman, but he talks to Simon. Boy, that says something, doesn't it? A man speaking to an uninvited woman who has a bad reputation. Not only does he affirm her worth and her presence, but he forces Simon to do the same thing right there in front of his influential friends. Boy, there'd be a side note there, wouldn't it? About how sometimes we pile on someone when we're with our friends as opposed to when we're alone. But just like before, it's not Jesus who's clueless. It's actually Simon. And Jesus continues. When I entered your home, you didn't offer me water to wash the dust from my feet. But she washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't even greet me with a kiss. But from the time I first came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. You neglected the common courtesy of olive oil to anoint my head, but she has anointed my feet with rare perfume. I tell you, her sins, and they are many, have been forgiven. For she has shown me much love. But a person who is forgiven little shows only little love. Simon, inviting me to dinner was more about you and your status than relating to me. The simple things hosts and hostesses do in our culture were never offered me because you were so much more into yourself and your image. The dinner and conversation were more about the image that you wanted than the relationship that you need. You see yourself better as most, and therefore you believe you don't need to be forgiven of anything at all. And the result? You are constantly comparing your perceived goodness to others. And as you compare, you always end up better than the others. You look down on people, my people, and you think you're actually doing it with my blessing. You probably expected me, Simon, to be polite and indirect, a Hallmark card kind of Jesus. But that's not what this moment calls for. This cannot be glossed over. Simon, yeah, you see this woman. I know you see her. The problem is not that you see her, but how you see her. What you think of her, and not just her, but of yourself. Simon, you don't see her like I do. And Simon, you don't see yourself like I do. You have no idea what it's like to actually have a relationship with me. If you did, you would have welcomed her to this table. You would have invited her and served her instead of rejecting her and people like her. Simon, our relationship is not at all what you think it is. Now, I don't believe Jesus' intention was ever to shame Simon, but his shallow way of thinking and relating had to be exposed right there in the moment so he could see it for the evil that it was. but not just for him, but for his influential friends who were at the table as well. They needed to know too. They needed to have the opportunity of a moment of awareness. I steal that phrase from a book called Conscience and Courage, an incredible book. I heard the author on the radio. She describes in one of her chapters, the book is written about basically asking the question, she wanted to know, why did non-Jewish people risk their lives to save Jewish people from the Holocaust? And so throughout the book, she explores all kinds of things. But in her chapter on awareness, she asks these non-Jewish people, when was the moment of awareness for you? And it's a fascinating chapter because it was all over the map. One woman says that a ghetto was being built right in front of her, and she didn't realize it until one day she's walking by, and the fence had been there, and someone she knew was on the other side of the fence, and that was her moment of awareness, that she realized that this is wrong. Another person watched from her apartment window as the Nazis came in and rounded up people that she knew from her apartment, from that community, and beat them up as they did it right before her eyes. It took all of that till that moment when she said, now I see, this is wrong. A German man was angry, actually, another illustration is a German man was angry at his countrymen because he had read Mein Kampf, what Hitler wrote, and said, it was all there all along, we should have seen it coming. In all three of these instances, the men and women who had that moment of awareness saw what was going on, what they were doing, what was happening, and realized it was evil and made a change. But sadly, that wasn't always the case. Eva, the author of the book, tells the story of a death camp commander who was actually sickened by the horror of what he's doing by killing Jews in the fashion that they were doing it. And instead of stopping and turning from what was happening, he actually tried to make it more efficient and less personal. And that's what makes the story with Jesus more fascinating in a sense. We don't know how they responded. The ending isn't written for us. We don't know if everyone at the dinner was brought to Jesus' way of understanding life and really surrendered, become disciples of him or not. But that's for us to guess and to see for some other day. And I think that's a wise intention on the part of the authors. But Jesus' use of questions in that moment is just as intentional as ever. From the Africa Bible Commentary, read this not long ago. Questions are an effective way of teaching because they force the learner to think for him or herself. So what did Jesus want to learn, to be aware of, to be awakened to? Well, I think Jesus wanted Simon to realize the woman's value, that she was created by God, that she was loved by God, and that Simon's responsibility was to love her and to welcome her and to encourage her. But I also believe he wanted Simon to see what was going on in his own heart, to be aware of the way he was relating, the way he was relating to the woman, the way he was relating to anybody who wasn't his kind, to the pain of the way his callousness inflicted pain on other people, and to the shallow, blind destructiveness of his own heart. He wanted Simon to have that moment of awareness to shift from one way of thinking to another by using a simple question and a story. A number of years ago, I was on a winter middle school retreat, and on that particular retreat, we had a couple of high school students as co-leaders. It was great to have them there, just like we do here. That intergenerational exchange does a lot for the faith on both sides. And so I'm sitting at the lunch table with two high school students, and 4 or 5 middle school girls walk in. And one of the girls sitting next to me just derides them because they all were using 80s hairstyles. I mean, they're using hairspray like the size of scuba tanks. I mean, it was just, and the hair's up, and they're primping for a middle school winter retreat. And she was just like, I'm so glad I'm not like them. I just can't believe it. And next to me on this side is Melody, sweet Melody. She says, you actually are like them, and you're worse. because you never pay any attention to me. And if you could have seen the look on Kelly's face, she was shocked. Because of Mel's integrity and Mel's love, something got through. And Kelly had a moment of awareness that shook her to the core. Like, I'm not that bad, am I? And the lunch conversation unfolded. Thankfully, because Kelly took that moment of awareness, shook her to the core, went back and even told her friends, hey, listen, we can't be like this. She had that moment and she made a change. And that's what Jesus was about for Simon and all the guests at that dinner. I love the way Leonard Sweet challenges us to think and love differently. He says this: the church is filled with too many golden rule Christians whose motto is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But there's not enough platinum rule Christians whose motto is, do unto others as they would have you do unto them. What is lacking, however, is titanium rule Christians, practicing the most powerful command of all, do unto others as Christ has done for you. That last phrase comes from something Jesus said before he was crucified at what we know as the Last Supper. He's alone with his 12 disciples. He knows the weight of the moment. They don't fully understand it yet. And he says to them this: so now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. That's a whole different level of love. Couldn't have been said to them before this. See, Simon had a view of himself that was much too high, not the kind of love for this woman that Jesus spoke to his disciples about soon after this event with Simon. Simon compared himself to everybody else, even Jesus, and he came out on top because he was better than them, and therefore he treated them that way. Now, I want to throw a brief caveat. There is also a view we could have of ourselves that is too low. And that's not the point of this story, but I do want to mention it. When we see ourselves below the love of Jesus, below the ability to be forgiven by Jesus, and to be able to receive his grace and move day after day, we become paralyzed. And we are unable to do what he calls us to do, what's so desperately needed to do, to love in this way that Jesus described to those of us in our world. The woman, she was just right. She was repentant, she was grateful, and there she was at the feet of Jesus. But back to Simon and his friends. Jesus' question and that story gave them that moment of awareness. As we said earlier, their response is a mystery. It's not recorded for us. I imagine the conversation goes like this. Simon thinking, can you believe this guy? He's so clueless. I can't believe he doesn't know what kind of person that is. I can't believe he's letting someone like that touch him, let alone interrupt this dinner. I'm so glad I'm not like that. Oh, Simon, you're so right. You aren't like that. And that's your problem. That person's repentant, grateful, and here at my feet. You're hard-hearted, demanding, and patronizing. You don't see those people like I do. In fact, you don't see yourself like I do. Simon's question, doesn't he know what kind of person she is, reflects a relationship based on comparing. Jesus' question, do you see this woman, offers a relationship based on compassion. And that question exposes Simon's hypocrisy. It exposes his distorted view of his relationship with Jesus. And it emphasizes the woman's value and her worth. Jesus defends her honor. There's just something about a good question. As Conrad Gemp says in his book, perhaps we get to the heart of spiritual reality not by asking things, but by allowing ourselves to be questioned. Can people ask me questions? Do I create an environment that allows for the input of others? Or do I only seek answers and questions that I like? Jesus' question cuts to the heart. It exposes Simon's attitude for what it was then and what it could be now. An attempt to make himself look good at everybody else's expense. It's arrogant, it's selfish and blind. It causes pain, it rejects others, and causes brokenness instead of healing and love. Simon was relying on spiritual shortcuts and loopholes, thinking he had himself in just the right place with Jesus, inviting him over for dinner. Jesus' question let Simon know he's in the wrong place. His question extends a hand to Simon, inviting him into a life of compassion instead of a life of comparison, a life of gratefulness instead of patronizing and demanding. Jesus' question to Simon is also one for us. Do you see them? Do you see them like I do? Do you see yourself like I do? As with each week, we're going to give you time to process the answer to those questions. And if you wish, you can email them to us to say, what were you thinking during? You can even take your phone out and do it right now. But we're just going to give you some time to process those questions. Who's Jesus bringing to your mind when you hear the question, do you see them like Jesus does? And how would you answer the question, do you see yourself like he does?